All right, so let's jump right into it. And what I would love to start with is asking you about the embodied human condition. Everything we talk about today is around that topic. So, how would you define the embodied human condition?
This is quite extraordinary. By the way, the term doesn't really exist. So we have to kind of carve it out, which I feel fully entitled to do because we are human and it's our condition. And as we shall see and delve into, we are embodied. I was quite shocked to see that the term human condition, trying to describe the life and the work and the labor and the activity of humans, taking into consideration the way that we are conditioned or what limits us as humans, was never really considered first and foremost from the perspective, the fact that we are mortal, embodied, wonderful, magical, physical creatures. So the term comes up in a book from the 50s by Hannah Arendt that can go about speaking about the human condition without looking at the fact that we are, by the way, living a body. I was struck by that. And I think it's very telling. It tells a story of our civilization, sort of coming into coexistence with that physical thing that we are, but not fully on board with it.
Yeah.
And this is actually setting the ground for what we are dealing with concerning embodiment. So if we roll back, we experience the world while and with our bodies. In the last 200,000 years, it was more or less the shape of that one that we carry around with us today. Is it worthwhile to give it a thought? Is it really something challenging for our spirits? What does it imply? These are huge questions.
Yeah.
And also fun questions. We can see it with babies. There is something so beautiful and alive about them. So what is it about life that somehow happens in bodies? Things that are alive are embodied. And we somehow manage to avoid the issue. And I find it very strange. So the embodied human condition would say that we are alive in a human body. That body has wonderful possibilities and potentials with it. It has limitations to it. And it filters and shapes our experience of the world around us and our experience of ourselves. And we can learn to work with it. Now, if the audience, people we are speaking now to, and you and I, if we really listen to the details, we might notice that just by the fact that I agree that I am embodied, I might feel a bit frightened or a bit limited. Is it all who I am? Am I just physical? Are we just material? In which way it already contains me? So there is a little bit of this apprehension about agreeing to this condition, which is part of the road that we have to tread. And this is part of this heritage that we carry. And I would really look deep into this. Again, with fun, free, crazy eyes, but still admit this is the heritage where we come from. The body used to be a bad thing. It used to be a sinful thing. It used to be a beast, an animal, out of control, has to be tamed. All these traditions we incorporate into our morality and into our religions. Most Eurasian religions, in one way or another, went through this phase of separating the spirit from the flesh.
Yeah.
Very interesting, by the way. And it happens more or less in the same centuries, about 2,500 years ago. It's worth a big conversation. And then we are inheriting this tradition, and it's built into our education, into our culture, into our speech. So starting to accept the fact that we are embodied, I would say starting to celebrate it. And not just going into panic. Does it mean that we are mortal? Does it mean that we end? All these questions immediately pop up and they are frightening. Wait until we get to the perception part, which blows our minds beyond the limitation also of our physical manifestation. But the questions are really huge. If we don't want to approach them philosophically and to lull them into sleep and to try to play rationalizing about them, we have to start to admit that we have an existential issue here. And for each one of us it's different because the bodies are different. It's also one of the wonderful things about them. So all this bundle and a lot of related issues are part of this human condition that is embodied. And I would really invite people to start considering this. We are embodied. Okay. Like, hello world. It's been around for, people would say, millions of years in different shapes, and we are evolving and developing, and people can have different ideas about this, but we are now definitely embodied. And how do we go about it? And I would look at it deeply respectfully towards creation, towards nature, towards who we are, and the dignity of human agency, of having this body and being this body and living through it. And we are up against or challenged by our own thoughts about it because we come from a disembodied culture. We are challenged by the structure of our language. That, for instance, none of us jumps out of our chair when I would tell you that I have a body. It sounds linguistically logical. It's utterly crazy. And I would talk about my body in the third person. As if it's a stranger. I would talk with more empathy and closeness and intimacy to my cat or to my dog, if I had one, than to my body. As a healer, when I teach people to sense their bodies and to start to bond with them, to be able to sense them as their own, to be able to even talk to them into healing, to calm down the pain, talk to it even like little baby talk, to make friends with it. It's a very strange thing. People would talk to their plant rather than to talk to a fracture or to a deep pain. So the way we communicate with the body is already indirected. We are constantly cut away from it. Sorry. And a colleague and a very interesting spiritual teacher, Ilan Stephanie, once drew my attention to the fact that the way that we are split from our bodies suggests a very deep dissociation. And a dissociative state is a traumatic state. Are we willing to reconsider, for instance, the body-mind split as a civilizational, traumatic phase in our evolution, not as a theoretical problem? To start to understand that when I look at my body as something I possess, something I have, or even something I don't like, I am actually displaying some kind of disturbance. A disorder that we call norm, but it's very weird. So if we start to challenge ourselves to this magical thing that we are as a body, and we start to open different doors into it, perceptual doors, we are on a journey which is one of the most bizarre journeys of perception. You as a tech person, consider that if you would have an app that needs to take you back to your body, and you try to do it by navigation, you actually try to create an app that brings you here, where you already are. How do I get there? Or how do I plan the time to come to the now that I'm already in?
Yeah.
It's a very awkward thing. And when we start to develop our perception in a way that it starts to look at this norm as very, very weird, we are starting to wake up.
Yeah.
So it goes deeper than just feeling good about the body.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to transform who you are as an embodied being.
And that is that is quite the task. When you started describing this and really pointed to the fact that we have traditions that are thousands of years old that have declared the body as the seat of sin. I was thinking about the Eastern religions, and in a way, not that that was perhaps his intention or emphasis, but Buddha declared the body as the seat of suffering. You get old, you get sick, and there's a possibility to transcend that suffering, not necessarily the sickness. So kind of putting perception above the body without necessarily meaning it that way. Or you have the ancient yogic traditions where Tantra or Tantric traditions might be very body focused, but the ones who won over were the Brahmacharyan traditions, for whom the body was a wild horse that needed to be disciplined and the seat of desire that you had to transcend, that the ultimate goal was to merge back into the universe and leave the body. So there's some rejection of it, and I do feel there is a lot of truth to it when you say that there's a certain traumatic experience that we are going through. Something happened that has gotten us to dissociate from our bodies, that we are not accepting them, forget about fully experiencing them or exploring them or enjoying them. That naturally there's the question of why or when might have that happened and what might be in there, but I want to put that aside because I want to go through the rest of the journey that you described as well. And perhaps the question I would start with, to make it more relatable to people, or even just to reiterate, because in a way we all know this, how does it look, how does it feel when somebody is living a kind of not so embodied experience? Over the last 20, 25 years, you have worked with thousands of people who have come to you, and in a way you have brought them back to their bodies with whatever goals and situations that they have come up with. So could you speak to that? How does it really look? What are all the different manifestations of this trauma that we have taken to be almost normal?
Yeah, it's a big topic. One thing is that and this I think is something everybody experiences, we can create a distance from our own experience and reflect upon it or about it as if we are not it.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we think, and we shouldn't open too many doors, it's just too fascinating, but it's truly there to at least to mention. The way we think is a metaphor of vision, a metaphor of mirroring, and a metaphor of reflection. If you think of it, you don't think your body. Down the line, I will also try to tap into this possibility, which is absolutely genius. But we don't think the body, we think about the body. So one way that if people come and they are suffering from pain, it's immediately, you already have a person shattered from their own experience, struggling with that experience, and usually trying to go away from that experience because it's too bad.
Yeah.
This is one of the things. So people would feel as if they are victims of their body. Mm-hmm. Their body is against them. And they are already severed, cut. They cannot bridge the gap. They just suffer the results.
Yeah.
So this would be one of the things. Let's have this possibility of the discussion, which is very much the nitty-gritty and the practice of my daily work in the last 30 years. It's like I'm getting old. The second thing is the way that I talk about the body, or I try to treat the body. For instance, most people look at the body as something that they don't like. So the huge industry of makeup and fitness and clothes and shoes. I'm not an expert on all these, but we can see there is a huge investment in trying to look good, assuming that we don't.
Yeah.
So I look at the body, and this is very weird. By the way, we are very weird creatures. I suggest to people to really look at this and say, wow, this is really interesting. What have we become?
Yeah.
So I can live the body, not fully identifying myself with it, suffering the result of how it looks, trying to fix the body in order for the body to reflect a better image of myself when I go to a party or to the street. At the same time, knowing that I objectify my body, let's say I would like to be attractive or to look normal or to look good. So I do the acts, I dress the beast, how it's supposed to be cloaked. Yet, innerly, I am not that one. Outwardly, I need people to react to my body as if a reflection or a symbol of who I am, and to create this status. And I play multiple double games, which are creating a huge effort in our society, a huge effort, a huge burden on our own. If you look at what happens nowadays with pictures that we have to put online and so on, and how we have to curate them, that we will look good as a reflection of a reflection or of a reflection, while in essence, I don't like who I am. And I try to work on it for someone else's eyes to look at in order to bring me the indirect benefits of maybe being liked.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's a lot of drama going on there.
Yes. And we are now approaching time that you really see the cracks emerging in society when you have early teenage girls committing suicide or becoming sick with anorexia, boys as well. Something is really strange. Something is wrong. And technology will not help us in certain places of this. So my ability to look at myself through this distance and to curate a self for myself, it sounds all crazy, is part of our absolute everyday's life. This is everyday life, and how we're supposed to work with this self and this body. So this is another aspect of it. A very deep aspect of this as well is the fact that I live a split reality between the way that my experience lives the world through qualities. Let's say I see your notes in yellow. And the rational understanding that this is actually not really yellow, and yellow doesn't really exist in the real world of objective science and technology, which actually means that the entire experience of my body is unreal, untrue, and as different traditions showed, the body is actually lying to us. And it's lying to us constantly. So the body is also a deceiver. It shows us a non-existent world. So we come with all this baggage. By the way, I'm not claiming any of those aspects of disembodiment to be true. I'm just saying they are part of the challenges along the way. Like physics tried to get rid of the observer and of perception and of the perceiver in order to get an objectified reality. It failed. So perception is part of the universe. Crazy, but interesting. So something similar will eventually happen with embodiment concerning human experience. We cannot get rid of it. Nowadays we try to upload it to the multi-whatevers, but this is part of the challenge. So to be human, to have a human experience, we are embodied, and we start to make amends with this wondrous tissue that we are.
So let's get into it.
Go.
Disease, stress, loneliness, attempts to keep a certain image of one definitely are simplistic attempts at running away from the reality, right? Or shaping it in a certain way for specific goals, kind of limiting our own experience. And that, as we know, tends to result quite a bit in all sorts of diseases or dis-eases. Now, how does it look or feel when one starts to live more embodied or experience this embodied or have this embodied experience? Can we speak a bit to now the
other side?
The other side.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more of the fun part, because what we said previously sounds a little bit sad, depressing.
Yeah.
And I would not try to take the thorn out of reality, and I think we do have a lot of trouble with regards to our embodied condition. So we don't want to create a situation that people feel even more helpless. The opposite. I would say once people, and let's bluntly say the real thing, people might not use these words, but once people start to bond with the body, to become friendly with the body, there is a sense of personal sovereignty. I start to feel in charge, which means also I'm more responsible, I'm more aware. I'm starting to be able to maneuver in my being, but also in my doing, and exercise and influence over my experience. Let's call this human agency, starting with the body. And those things become part of how people describe their experience in very personal, idiosyncratic ways, but suddenly they can do something. Suddenly they can transfer what they learn about fear from a certain place in sessions, for instance, and suddenly I can see them applying the same thing into a different context, which is genius. Yeah, this is true learning, true intelligence. And people start to describe a wealthy, not in terms of money, but a wealth, a richness of experience. It's a bit like moving from a linear movement to a multimodal or multi-spatial experience. So it's moving from a trickle, that is usually what happens in our minds, from a verbal world, from conceptual world, suddenly expanding it, still being able to communicate, to talk, to think, but to see that, wow, actually my language, my words don't manage to cope with the richness of experience. The most extreme example for this in one of the sessions I had years ago, a doctor told me on the table, he was a client, Eylam, this is unbelievable. I know for a medical fact that what I experience is medically impossible. This was beautiful, like one of those moments. So something happens to our perception when we are embodied that is thrown into the highway, but not a highway of two-dimensional streets. Super way. That suddenly I can feel multiple directions. Suddenly I'm able to hear my thoughts before I formulate them. Suddenly I'm able to really sense and feel the changes of my body. I have a lot with fractures, for instance. When people start to regenerate, so they feel their bones, they develop a tension, and they say, wow, I feel this pain is different than the pain of the fracture. This pain feels as if the bones are woven. They start to feel the moving. Things like this, that suddenly the body, in other words, become an ecosystem. It's a jungle, which we know for a fact that it is. We are made of 100 trillion cells, They are all alive,
Mm-hmm.
and we are still calling ourselves an individual, and we are. It's amazing. So they go into this forest, and I'm trying to guide them not to get lost and to just get happily about and starting to explore what happens to them. And it's a very interesting forest. So suddenly we become an ecosystem. Suddenly it starts to be very broad experience. It's a little bit like an inner universe that we have, that we are, and with it comes a sense of waking up. So if people know from meditation or from certain training what happens when you become silent, it's not that there is no noise, but time becomes lucid and clear and free from noise, from inner noise, and a space opens. And then changes your experience. And you wake up into a slightly empty from you space that you can perceive things very, very clearly. That kind of thing happens a lot during sessions. And we get there again and again and again. Sessions are just one way. But the embodied condition, when we start to delve in, becomes very rich. For some people, it's almost fun, like taking drugs. I hear it sometimes from people. They say, like, wow, this was really trippy. And you see that they come out with big eyes. And so it doesn't have to look sad and bad and difficult. And we shouldn't have this impression. It's not the case. What happens is there is a broadening sense of experience, because suddenly I experience much more than just what my mind reflects about. It changes my perspective to my pain or to the struggles that I'm confronted with. It gives me a grip or possibility to push and pull, to act, to play, almost like a child, like a little monkey with a banana. I can do something with the body. It's not an alien world for me. And I have a sensation of waking up. Now, at the beginning, and I think it's most spiritual traditions will describe it in a similar way, you are finding yourself on this multi-layered highway, and it's overwhelming. Now, the beautiful thing about the body is that you can relax, because you don't need to figure out, you don't need to drive, you don't need to accelerate. You kind of have a little bench with a cup of tea, watching the cosmos and being part of that cosmos.
Yeah.
So actually, this is one of those Mobius loops that are amazing, that people wake up and say, wow, I'm actually this body, and this body is part of the universe, and we will get there. But it's as if through me, the universe now ponders itself. In the modern times, we are very busy with the subject looking out.
Yeah.
But through the body, we have the out looking in and backwards. So those are the experiences that people have. And on the way, they bond with their pains, with their fears, with their injuries, with their traumas. And gradually, we learn to neutralize the tissue that is hurt.
Yeah.
And to allow it to rejuvenate. So, unlike the attitude of perhaps with medicine that is more cutting it out or medicating it, here there is more an inner transformation, that the hurt or the pain that we deal with embodiment starts to become open to restructuring. So the old, let's say, held information of, let's say, bad pain. And as we know, if I have pain, I broke my arm twice. So when you have a fracture here, you compensate there, you learn to work with a different part, and you find yourself twisted, not because of a direct problem, but indirectly trying to cope with it. So then when we start to connect with those things, we start to see a whole learning that is different. And the body can start to address the issue and heal it. And sometimes we don't have a narrative or a story why and how, but we facilitate the conditions, the embodied human conditions, that allow the body to heal. And then there is a transformation, new tissue, new build-up, new ways of doing it. This is very, very interesting. Which opens another story of the embodied intelligence.
Yeah.
But we can look at it a little bit later. But what happens to people when they go this road of embodiment is an expansion of their horizon. Again, horizon is a bit of a two-dimensional line on the ocean, let's say. Consider the fact that when you are a body, you also have directions behind you, sideways. So the horizon is not just in front. But that you start to wake up in the middle. And that's the crazy bit. In the middle of what? In the middle of eternity, in the middle of infinity. And you suddenly are there. And your body is at home because he or she or they come from there. We breathe oxygen. It comes from supernovas in the universe. So I just now took something from millions or billions of years ago in a different world entirely. This is home. It could be felt also as hostile, but it's also wonderful. When people go through the threshold of perception, many times it's not so bad. It's not so terrifying. There's nothing hostile or indifferent. So the body as well, when we go there, it opens this huge sphere, and suddenly I wake up in the middle of something. And no worry, after a few hours we go back to sleep. But then we have a chance to wake up again. And we can start to connect those crests together, and consciousness or perception can start to evolve. But it opens a door. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. And it's incredible. And of course, with each part of it, many more questions come up. So at some point, I do want to get into the embodied intelligence as well. Because it seems that the path or the experience of embodiment coming from not being very embodied is really rather simple, allowing for more complexity. So somebody coming with pain, initially perhaps just becoming more aware of that pain, and in that way releasing that pain, or being able to realize that they're compensating with the other side of the body, and that brings them to just that little bit richer experience of themselves. It's taking a walk with pain and not listening to the birds, and suddenly the pain goes away and you hear the birds and see the trees. Your experience becomes richer. And bit by bit, you become more and more aware, a bit more in tune with what is going on, and you're accumulating skills and capabilities and broadening your horizons, or turning horizons into infinite clouds. It's fascinating. It does also beg the question of patterns. So earlier I wanted to leave the question of why do we then leave our bodies? Why do we want to run away from our bodies? What kind of traumas have happened to us that have made us run away? And I would want to somehow the idea that comes to my mind is that we are also creatures of patterns, and even though perhaps deep down we know how much of a rich experience we can have and how nourishing that is, if the pattern that we learn is running away from the body, that becomes our reality, and we almost always kind of go reinforcing that as well. So there's a bit of learning different patterns or unlearning. Can you speak a bit to that of what is the attractiveness of these limiting patterns?
Yeah, so if we take the word pattern, and by the way, pattern comes from texture. So in the human experience, usually we speak of patterns as structure of behavior. So if we speak about that in this context, we can also add the word routine or habit or rituals in certain domains. I would also add another term that people should consider, the autopilot. We also even know the neurology of it. That certain things we learn go into certain places where we don't need to relearn them, to save energy. So the neurologists say. The basal ganglia and other areas of the brain that keep those habits in a way that I can now run through the motion. This is, on the one hand, extremely practical and very necessary. Because if we all the time are living in this deep meditative state with the full richness of the highway, how do we ride the bike to the market? You know, we just bump into things because we're just wow. Okay, so this is a gift that has to be managed. We are getting also into attention management and all these subjects related. But on the one hand, the practical life that we are running requires us to have an autopilot, requires us to be able to function on instinct, on learned reflexes, so to speak. Like pressing the brakes without even thinking about it. Or we know this from everyday life. It's necessary. The question is, who is the boss? If we cut through to the main issue, the question is, who is the boss? Is the autopilot taking over your human life? Or at any moment of choice, you can override the autopilot and go back into full wakeful state? This is the question.
Right.
What happens with patterns is it's a little bit like junk software, sometimes even good software, but they are launched for you automatically. I very much like to play with humor, with jokes, and also with different kinds of equations and formulas and signs to just boggle the mind. And when you boggle the mind, you actually tickle the underbelly of that autopilot, and it wakes you up. So it's a wonderful experience, but it has to be well managed. Like you cannot go now multi-philosophical when you have to just deal with running to the bus. There are things that are immediate priorities of the embodied human condition. The question is, who is the boss? That's why I'm saying there is sovereignty and agency of humans. They must take back their possibility to govern or to be entirely, fully perceptive at times when they choose to. Like to be able to concentrate, focus when I choose to be utterly silent when I choose to. This control we lost. The question is, who is the boss? And how can we start to take back what is ours? Because the patterns are launched as if of their own accord in order to help us. It's almost like a bodyguard that dodges the bullet. But there are thousands of them, and they're all over the place. In the end, you don't see anything. They're just bodyguards. The question is, can you manage those apps or softwares or protections by choice to be able to, just like you do with a blanket, with your duvet, take it off, take it on. This little choice appears to be extremely demanding of people. So when we go on the autopilot, it's very difficult to find the exit. And many times people even describe it. I go into a situation, I know I don't want to do this, but it ends up in this way, and I'm saying that, and and as if there is a tunnel, similar to this dissociative state, there is a tunnel that I know the entry, I hopefully know the exit point, I lost control in the middle. For instance, with temper, anger, arguments. This happens a lot. Going to visit your family. All these patterns are jumping all over the place. Now, on the one hand, they come to protect you. On the other hand, it's almost like sunglasses that are so thick and dark that they don't allow you to see anything. So you end up being blinded by the shades. Crazy. And we lost the operating system, I would say. We lost a lot of the choice of, do I want this now? The autopilot will say yes. Elon Musk will say, sure.
It's fascinating because earlier we talked about the fact that our ability to distance ourselves a bit and look at ourselves and be able to reflect on it. It's a very important quality that we have, but that can become overused or abused or over-specialized and lead to disconnection from the body. Our ability to narrow our vision and ride the bike to the supermarket is a very useful ability, but that can be abused and overused, that we forget that perhaps a car is also available, or we could take the walk, or someone else is driving next to us, or the speed is not necessarily the speed that we really need. And it reminds me of the old Indian concept of being lost in Maya, in the play. So you have a play going on, and all the actors have forgotten the timing. And even if you're supposed to enter the stage in Act 3, when the first dialogue has been said, every time you hear a dialogue, you just jump right in because you forgot the specific timing, and you took part of the pattern and you just start repeating it. And suddenly you have everybody on the stage, everybody's repeating their lines, and there's a mess going on. And we forgot that we can also become the director who has the overview and who can orchestrate all of this. That creates a real effect. That is the true total experience of the play and the playmakers at the same time.
Now, let's take the example you gave. Let's say that each one of those actors says the right text. Most people would say, but look, it's the right text.
Mm-hmm.
It's out of context,
mm-hmm.
but it's the right text. How do we deal with this multiple layered
mm-hmm.
human experience? And again, it's the embodied human experience, because I have 2 arms, I have 2 hands, 20 fingers. How do I manage them?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just yes or no. It's
mm-hmm.
It's a real world. It's full of things. And it's all within context, within timing, you said.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to get the text right, and we are losing the context.
Mm-hmm.
So this is precisely the issue. And we don't understand what is wrong. We just forgot that things have perspectives,
mm-hmm.
they have priorities, they have a kind of an unfolding. It's multi-layered. And we believe that the autopilot will do the job, mm-hmm. because we get very good in this. So we can believe the autopilot. It will just be boring, but it will get us through the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's precisely this, that we are out of tune and out of sync and out of flow. By the way, when people learn to pay attention to their bodies and to bond with their bodies, again, I'm sorry that I'm saying it in wrong language of English, that is their bodies. But when people come into inner dialogue with themselves as a belly, let's say, they very quickly start to sense that it's out of sync.
Mm.
It becomes an antenna. The body becomes like a resonance Wi-Fi thing that starts to show you what's happening contextually.
Yeah.
And multiple contexts at the same time.
Mm.
That I feel that I would like to educate my son, and I'm getting very angry with my wife,
mm-hmm.
and I end up being angry with my son and trying to educate the dog and life.
Mm-hmm.
You know? If I feel my body, many times it gives me the warning, this doesn't feel right. But if I'm already launched,
mm-hmm.
it's already the Google browser is jumping in my face.
Yeah.
I lost the connection. And so this is part of how the body starts to signal to us certain things.
Yeah.
By the way, neurologically, we already know
mm-hmm.
that there are somatic markers, certain things that the body shows us, don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't yet know how to work with them because they seem to be conditioned
mm-hmm.
on trauma or pain or bad experiences, so we don't want to repeat them. But that's very, very low level. It's very primitive. But the fact that the body talks to us constantly can also be a sign of how can I do it differently? How can I deal with this? And I would say, to be human requires a lot of awareness.
Yeah. So in this,
I hope I answer your question.
Yes, absolutely, because it helps us continue the conversation. the way I'm imagining this right now is that there are multiple patterns or multiple waves that are merging into each other, and we could focus on one wave or a group of waves or the entire ocean, and that is our lived experience, right? We have the shoulder and the elbow and the wrist, but all of that is part of I.
Yeah.
And we could focus on one or focus on the group and call it an arm, or focus on all of me. And there are multiple patterns that are being played on these different levels.
And let's just continue the sentence and say, we are infinite.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go?
Indeed.
This is actually the core issue. You can focus on each one of those. You can focus on something else. You have to drive this thing.
Yeah.
It's like a spaceship that was now on autopilot. There was once a movie about an autopilot that took over a ship. How do we start to wake up in the middle of this space travel?
So putting aside quantum physics, which might allow us the possibility of jumping in space without explaining it to anybody else how we did that, in our normal experience, we tend to follow the law of conservation of momentum. If a pattern is that of evading conversation, talking about mentally, I have an issue with my boss and I do not have the skill or the desire to talk, and my pattern is to evade that conversation, I will most likely repeat that until I come to you, we have a few sessions, you help me realize where that might be coming from, and I start unraveling that, and I find the new pattern, or start practicing that is, start broaching the conversation. And once I learn that pattern of actually engaging with a potential conflict, I might apply it in other places. So I had this pattern that was being conserved because that was the dominant pattern. Now I start to learn the new pattern, and over time that becomes the dominant pattern. Sounds like the way out is the same that we took into dis-ease. The way we took into dis-ease by narrowing our patterns and capabilities, we have to use the same process of learning different patterns to free ourselves up. And what I want to ask is, other than the beautiful support that you and many other somatic coaches are able to provide through different modalities, can we just list out the different things that can help people expand their experience to not reinforce the same narrow patterns, but come out of it? And I'm thinking meditation, thinking sports, thinking dancing. Can we talk about the different effects of these and how those combinations could help us become embodied again and reinforce the positive patterning, so to say?
Yeah, it still feels as if there are open doors that we didn't close for the issues before. Very, very pregnant and full and rich topics. It's beautiful. Let me, before suggesting certain option, just have a word of caution. We are living a very, very tough, competitive marketing, branding world. Also within the alternative scene. It's very easy to take a certain practice and to brand it. And by the way, creating it as if a certain ownership of a certain thing. I would like to start one floor under, or one step before that. Embodiment belongs to the one living it, and it belongs to nature, by the way. We tend to forget that. But we have this credit of 120 years of having this living creature at our disposal, and we are it. Again, the language, sorry. The body belongs to nature, and our perception belongs to nature, belongs to us as the expanded one. So going to an option of working with something doesn't have to have the language of the right method, the right modality. It doesn't belong to anybody. it's important to say, because many times, even when I work with people, and nowadays many people are trained already.
Yeah.
So they breathe technique. They don't breathe like their body breathes. So the technique became between me and me. You see the danger.
Yeah.
It's a bit what you said about pattern and learning another pattern. So I can jump from autopilot 1 to autopilot 2.
Right.
And many people jump from one extreme, let's say black autopilot, to a white autopilot. Because some people tend just to jump from one extreme to the other. It's like conversion of religion. I can become a fanatic of another one. So if we don't try to create an autopilot and hold to the new truth, okay, that's a tricky business, huh?
Yeah.
To be human. We start to bond with our bodies and with our embodiment and human embodied condition as a gift to nature, as a gift to ourselves, as a gift to the planet. And not necessarily owning it to an Asian tradition or South American tradition or whatever. And this is the place that I would like to start, where it's a very intimate connection between a person to themselves. And how do we build the bridge? So if we look at some of the roads that can be trodden off, for many people the most accessible thing is to take a breath. But again, if you can take a breath, sensing your body, not how it's supposed to be, for instance, with full yogi breath. Or, so one thing would be, for instance, this. Another thing would be to be able to shift, and it's very, very important, to be able to shift my attention from being focused on thoughts that are for me abstract and conceptual to sensations that are perceptual, embodied, sensed. It's a felt sense. This shift allows me to move rather quickly from the reflection of concepts to the experience of percepts. And many times it feels for people low, as if I go down from the palace of my mind. But actually the sensation becomes very intriguing and very interesting. So, in my words, if I'm allowed, I would say that every sensation, when you well observe it, becomes an organ of perception and becomes a door of perception. By the way, between the lines, you can even find it in Goethe's scientific writings. Brilliant, intelligent person. But this you can do with embodiment, not only for science. Yeah? So we're moving from the conceptual, from the mind content, into a sense, or felt sense in the body. It's another shift. The one that I felt and explored in the last decade or so, and seemed to be extremely powerful to people, was the way that they are using their eyes. Very surprising. We are using our eyes in a very tricky way. And if we learn to undo that way, the eyes become like the way of saying the eye of a needle. There is an eye of a needle. Yeah? So this little space of the eye holds the world. We are fixating what we see and try to manage it with efforts in our eyes. But it also holds back our own experience. So the eye locks a lot of tension between the in and the out, the inner and outer experiences. So when people learn to let go of their eyes, or to trick their eyes out of this, especially now with the devices and phones and everything, it blows the autopilots out of sync and allows you certain time to be able to rest also the brain, but also the world, and to see it with a fresh or perceive it with a fresh experience. So something with the eyes as well.
Are we talking about simply relaxing the eyes, or?
It can be relaxing, but it can also be guidance of how to position them and how to work with them, and little exercises about them that create, I would say, an escape route from the way the mind is dominating the situation.
Right.
That's
I would love to get into it.
a big topic. Yeah,
bit
happily,
later, yeah.
happily. And one fourth thing would be, how can we induce flow? Now, usually flow is a kind of a blissful experience that happens when we are engaged in optimal experience of running, swimming. But the secret to flow is that attention becomes immersed in the experience and in the activity. That there is less and less of this little bastard that reflects on what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Because I'm so immersed. This we can induce by training. It's a little bit more demanding than the rest of them, but it's also very simple. It's enough that you have to fully concentrate on certain experiences that you induce a sense of flow. And this sense of flow, again, brings you back to the body as an embodied experience. So at least those four things I can, on the top of my head, mention. And each one of them can be done as a little training, and can also be something that people can develop for themselves, almost like home cooking, which usually tastes the best. And doesn't have to have a specific title or branding to it. I was working on the last two a hell of a lot. So if we spoke about, just to remember, about breathing, shifting attention from the mind to the sensations, working with the eyes and working with flow. These things, and the last two, I was working a hell of a lot recently, and there are a lot of things that can be done and also can be guided to people with relatively simple experiences and exercises that don't have to be very complicated or very dramatic.
Fascinating.
Okay? It goes in the right direction.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's a tendency, and this would be a pattern that I'm personally trying to undo as well, which is to ask which one is the most important, which one is the key, you know. And I think this is something that we have taken on as a mental concept, also as a population. At least that is my experience of thinking in absolutes. Thinking in all or nothing, thinking in if we would find that silver bullet, just tell me, do I need to book 10 sessions with you, or do I need to sit and do breathing exercises, or will sports alone will do it for me? Because sports or meditation or dancing or some of those things can very much be in the fourth category, that once you get into it, that is a sense of flow. You forget about your experience and you're there. But they then don't really have the first 2 or 3. But I want to put that aside. I think that's just a pattern. Let's. I think we are almost at 40 odd minutes, so let's give it 10 minutes more, and open up the conversation to some of the doors that we did not close, and perhaps talk about how, because you talked about we are infinite, and
that we are infinite.
Yeah, and that is an experience that some people can definitely attest to, perhaps on a regular basis, or they have had glimpses of it. One of the common experiences people have is that of near-death experiences, or being in that situation that time slows down. And you see your entire life, and you see much more beyond that, and you come back almost always transformed. It doesn't have to be, but we definitely have that possibility, and that possibility comes out of the ordinary, in a way, the ordinary path of becoming more embodied. Can we talk a bit about this whole thing of what magic are our bodies? So all my questions had been very much on the low level. How do we go from pain and disease to becoming more ourselves? And we talked a bit about the flow and all of those things. Let's give the space to the magic of the body. What would you say to that?
Wow. Okay. You're touching already the runway of how embodiment transforms into this infinite thing that we are perceptually. That our perception is actually very, very large. I will first of all go with my pain, with my heart pain, about this topic. And also, to be honest, I had experiences that I know that are going in this direction that you described. That's also what sets me from very young ages on this path. But when I was researching this, one of the things that really broke my heart was that many people that are transformed, it's true, and they come back, in some form or another, usually, not always, look at the body as something very low. And even if they experienced tremendous things and tremendous beings and visions, the body was not part of the celebration. And I suspect it's part of the old school that we were all. The body is the prison of the soul and the tomb of the spirit. It's Plato. So, if we manage, and this is my life dedication, if we manage to go from the duality of the spirit, flesh, body, mind, psycho, soma, into the unity of what embodiment is. And if we realize that infinity is basically all around us, and eternity is just another name for it, we don't have to reject the body. If we know that with every breath we take a bit of supernova dusts with the oxygen we breathe, and carbon as well, and everything that is life, even material, on a material level, is actually cosmic. We don't have to reject the body. It's a manifestation. It's a manifestation of who that magical creature that we are is now and here. I can be fully respectful towards it. This is the transition that we have to go through. The thing that happens and I think we live in extraordinary time today. We are starting to connect the dots between the old mysteries of Eleusis, for instance, and the cultures of the East that were using also drugs, but also expanding perception to what people now deal with when they go on different trips, people that have near-death experiences, out-of-body experience. When we start to connect them together, we start to see a huge panoply of what happens with perception when it's allowed to expand. We have a tendency to look at it as if the body is limiting it. And it's not entirely true. The body can become a vehicle of this as well. The Kundalini, for instance, if you look at the development or the Jing Chi, the training, even of sexual energy, of working through the system and opening your perception, is nothing bad for the body. You don't have to escape the body in order to see beyond it. That's very old school. That's the Middle Ages. This is the Platonic concept of the cave. I would say that the body that we used to look at as the cave, or the cave here, the light is reflected backwards. This is the stuff of stars. This is the stuff of the universe. If we learn how to ride this vehicle, in the Kabbalistic tradition we call it Merkava, it's the chariot. If we learn how to work with the Merkava, how to work with those experiences, because they are made of stars, why should we reject them? There is something strange about this. And we learn to work with it and to expand. And for this, we don't need to die. I hope we don't need to only take drugs for this. People had wonderful experiences, people I heard from. We don't have to look at it in very violent ways towards the body, but we have to learn how to transform our attitude to the body. And then we find here what is there. We go in and we find ourselves out. That's what the Mobius ring. I go into the body and I feel as if it's a subjective thing, and I finally find myself out in nature. I have bacteria in my belly that belongs to the ocean. And in this sense, to make amends also with the broken heart of losing our bodies are part of the earth. The word human comes from the Latin word for soil, humus. We are soilings, earthlings, nature children. We are the earth, we are the planet. We come from there, not only from the universe. So, and we go back to the earth. So actually, think of it like this, that you and I have a little piece of earth under all the sweaters and trousers. We have a little piece of earth, and we have a chance. Do we care for the planet? Do we care for Mother Earth? Do we care for nature? Do we care for the environment? It actually starts here. Doesn't have to, but it's a wonderful place to start. And by bringing this care and this love into and again, it's not a selfish thing. It belongs there. Yeah, in 100 years, this is dust. It goes back to the earth. How can I respectfully live my life? Being embodied, accepting the fact that I'm mortal, infinite and mortal, unfolding, developing, allowing this magic that I am to be cultivated and poured back to the entirety. I don't see anything wrong with it. I would even say that this is as if a new spirituality, a new sense of respectful human beings coming of age to their own perceptual mystery and learning to work with it respectfully. And for this, I would just like to add another little thing that maybe will stitch together the different parts of what we said. Embodiment made a kind of a buzzword into our lives in the last few decades. But actually, when we looked at the body before, there were traditions of hundreds of thousands of years of therapy. In the 60s, there was a huge development, including body work and how I learned it from my teacher, that we can start to learn. We don't just undergo therapy. We are not just medicated. We can learn to be involved in the process, which was an amazing thing. So the skills of learning, you mentioned it, can be targeted for a specific need. I would suggest to look into another step, another phase for the future of embodiment, which starts to look at the knower, at the learner, at the student, at the person that we are, not just learning a skill or getting better with therapy, but starting to embark upon a journey. So from therapy, we go into learning, and we go into a journey that is deeper and longer, but very personal. And here I don't have any other word than initiation. That in a way, the journey of our perception, embodiment, and attention, with taking responsibility for our lives and cultivating, not just consuming, takes us from looking at the body as something that needs to be healed passively in therapy into something that I can learn to be involved in certain learning skills, like learning to breathe, learning to move, and starting to look at something deeper than just learning. There is a journey in me happening now, even in our little conversation. It's part of my soul journey, part of my spirit journey, part of my perceptual journey into an initiation. And unlike the old school where we were initiated by the shaman of this tribe in this particular way, We are now doing it very, very personally because each one of us is utterly unique, and a lot of the old systems are not anymore there. So we are looking for ways to develop and unfold this magical thing that we are, hopefully healing and hopefully learning, but there is an initiation unfolding that takes you into a very, very long journey. It's like the deepest breath, that in this you can learn certain skills, and in this you can hopefully heal from certain ailments. But there is a larger vision of how you're unfolding as a being or becoming. This is where I think it should go. And there is a lot of work to be done, in happy work, to bring this out to the public. And to have people, again, individually and collectively sharing it, but also exploring this as unique people. We are utterly unique. So we can't even copy-paste from somebody else. It's completely fine. We can still share our adventures, like you and me are doing since a while, and still have each one their own roads to do it on. So this is how I would look at it, as kind of a sum up.
I think it's beautiful, and I think that's where we can end for today.